Start the workshop, just because I like to bang the gavel.
The gavel's fun.
I apologize.
We knew that about you.
And Member Jones, I think you'll accept my apology when I tell you that I'm a little tardy because we were just in a meeting discussing design guidelines for HPB. That is why I'm late. Am I forgiven?
Oh, you're always forgiven.
It's been a whole extra 60 seconds. You
I
made
know,
us
she's
wait.
tough.
I mean,
She's tough.
I am tough.
All right, so just on this slide, I wanted to say that it's a reminder that our next meeting, we're actually not scheduled for December, so our next meeting is scheduled for January 10th. We've got new business, so we're going to finally talk about plaques and awards program today. Stephanie gave you a handout here that has some images, and I just wanted to, before I really start coming up with a structured program that I can bring to staff, meaning community development director and your city manager, I wanted to gauge what the board is actually looking for in a plaques and awards program. So just to start, why are we here and why are we even discussing this? It was one of your goals and objectives to have such a program. And plaques and awards programs are good for multiple reasons. They're great for educating your citizens and visitors, tourists. They're great for outreach. They're great for engaging people to learn about the history of St. Cloud and the history of its buildings. And it does bring some kind of visibility and community awareness to the fact that you all have historic resources. They're also really great when you get to the point where you're developing some kind of a tourism program, focused, heritage tourism specifically. They're definitely very useful when it comes to that point. We're not there yet, but so wanted to talk about the types of plaques. You just thought we were just going to throw something up on the building, but we do have different types of plaques, and that's why I have this handout in front of you. So some plaques that we can have on these buildings are National Register plaques. Those are the ones that you see that simply say this property has been placed on the National Register of Historic Places by the United States Department of Interior. So any building that is on the National Register, and if you're contributing to a historic district, you are on the National Register, can actually have this plaque. Sometimes they're a little more detailed, as you see in the second example here, that says the Porter House. On this one, it doesn't just say that the property has been placed on the National Register. It says the year of construction and the name of the building. So you can have a little bit more information on there. The other kind of plaques that we have, again, are recognition plaques. They're recognizing just minimal data about the building. So it might have a year of construction. It might have, if the building has a name to it, we'll have the building name on there. And then oftentimes you'll see at the bottom of that example, that's the third example, whatever the sponsoring organization is. So if it's the city of St. Cloud, or if St. Cloud Main Street is sponsoring the plaque program, usually you would have the entity that's sponsoring on there. So I gave two examples. I gave a Preservation Foundation example on the left, and I gave City of Tampa example on the right. So those are really recognition plaques. They're just kind of recognizing this minimal information about the building. The next type of plaques that we have, that I have outlined here, are preservation awards. So if you determine that you want to have annual preservation awards in which you're recognizing very good rehab practice, preservation practice, any restoration, etc., then you might want to consider a plaque for the building. I'm going to go into awards a little bit more later, but I gave you some examples. One is from New Smyrna Beach, and the other one is from one of my favorite historic districts, Sanford. The one in Sanford is a program with the Sanford Historic Trust. It's the local nonprofit for historic preservation in Sanford. They manage the plaque program, and then they collaborate with the city annually on their awards program. So they do an actual awards reception, and they try to make it pretty impressive, which it really is. Okay, so what we also have in terms of plaques is you have an opportunity to do interpretive plaques, and that's going to be on that page 3 that I have here for you. So these plaques can have the individual building and more information about that building. So somebody can actually walk up to the building and read a historical narrative about the building. Those are a little bit more brief than the right-hand example, which is the state markers, which we already have a great program in St. Cloud, thanks to St. Cloud Main Street. Member Stark, how many?
We have 7.
7 of them. And how many more are you applying for?
There's probably at least that many more.
Yeah. So that's a pretty healthy program going after the state markers there. Some things that you all want to consider when we're talking about a plaque program, of course, is what type of plaques are you envisioning? Are you thinking that you want to have interpretive plaques on the buildings? Are you thinking that you just want to further more this existing state markers program? Are you thinking that you want the plaques to be in commemoration of an award? Or do you just want the plain National Register plaques on buildings? So that's one thing that I need some feedback from the board today, is to consider what you're actually wanting to achieve with your plaque program. And we should probably have me pause right there and talk about the goals and objectives that you all have for the plaque program first, and then we'll talk about goals and objectives for awards next. So I just want to, I'm going to go through the board members here, and I'll start with Chair Clark. Objective for having a plaque program that HPB sponsors and maybe does in collaboration with another entity. What would you like to see come out of such a program?
Oh, sure. Ask the political question. You can't talk to the political animal next to me here. I mean, to me, it's a matter of recognition. I mean, you're recognizing, your property owners for what they have, and hopefully through that also enticing them to maintain that. So, I mean, realistically, from a plaque standpoint, you want it to be so that it's obviously visible to the public, and I guess have enough meaning to have people actually take ownership of it.
So are you thinking the plaque program would best be suited as an award in recognition of property owners' efforts to rehab a property, or more recognition of the history of the building? And you can look at these examples that I have here.
I mean, I think it could be either way. I mean, it really just depends on what the properties are. So, I mean, some properties don't necessarily have a strong history other than time itself and style. So it's kind of hard to sit there and say it needs to be one or the other. I think obviously both have merit, especially if you're trying to, make a cohesive district overall.
Oftentimes, the interpretive ones you'll see more on the commercial buildings. So Chair Clark does bring up a good point. On the residential, you might not have all that history fleshed out like you might have in the commercial district. So I see these oftentimes on the commercial buildings, not so often on residential buildings, unless it's something like a house museum, and sometimes you'll see them on house museums. So that would be kind of goal and objective?
From my standpoint, yeah.
Okay. Chair Stark, Vice Chair?
Well, it's pretty much the same as Richard. But one of the things we need to make sure that we're aware of as we're making the decision, the current plaques that we have around, we have different ones. First of all, the oval one with the date on it in bronze is the ones that we have already, and there's a significant number of those. I don't even know how many numbers there are of those. And that's the one most people have been asking for. People will come in and ask about those. Carmelo knows, he was one of them several years ago. So that is one type that we already have. So if we want consistency, we just need to think about that, unless we want to just go in a different direction. The National Register one, that plaque is also the plaque that we use that's on the Heritage Museum, and it's on the train station, the VFW Hall. When we got those on the National Register, that is the plaque with the bronze, again, to be consistent with the other plaques. That's the design that we've been using, so we need to kind of keep that in mind. Obviously, the state markers are what they are. I agree, if we do interpretive, I think that is more appropriate on commercial than on residential. If we do it. The other thing we have to take into consideration is these are not cheap. So there's that whole dynamic. So we need to think about that as well. So I think our goals is to be able to identify it. There are an awful lot of our houses that are residential, that are historic. Some people don't even realize it. Some people do, and they want it recognized. But I do think, just from the many people who have come in and talked to us, that they see that as a badge of honor, and it does make them more caring of their home and their buildings, because that identifies them as something special. So I think we do have to kind of reach that goal with them. But we have a lot of people who are interested in that particular project. I get asked all the time.
On the one that has the existing ones that are kind of just recognition of the property.
Right.
It's maybe year of construction and the fact that it's
Right.
historic.
Mhm.
Okay. So I do want to talk about criteria for those things, but I want to hear from the other board members. So I'm going to make a star and circle back to that. So, Member Horning?
Yes, yes. No, I think it's a great idea because it does recognize the buildings and it recognizes the people who live there, and if they're making improvements on their house, then that looks good too, rather than something that's falling down. So, yeah, and we get a lot of visitors to St. Cloud, and so some people actually do come on tours to see these houses or buildings that have plaques on them. That's their goal of coming to a city. So I think that would enhance why they come to St. Cloud. And I guess, well, as long as we're talking about these, I know it isn't what you have on your paper here, but in the future, is there some sort of plaque that's going to be available for the kit houses? We have already identified 3 kit houses for sure. And we have other ones that we think are kit houses, and we're still working on them. But for sure, we've got 3.
That could be something that we can look at as part of this. I know for the kit houses, we were not able to get any confirmed. Is yours confirmed for the state?
I'm still waiting on the National Registry.
No, but it is
Mine is a
Carmelo,
kit.
Your house is a kit house,
Yes.
though. Yeah, it is
Yeah,
a kit house.
we got the planners from the Sears and everything from where it came from.
So,
Yep.
once we have the kit houses that are established, and we can definitively say that might be something that you all do want to look at, and you might want to consider what is the design of that going to look at to commemorate that it's a kit house. So that one, I would say, maybe keep on the back burner.
Yeah, right.
But it's good to be thinking about that right now, and because you don't have so many of them yet, you've only got 3, I think the ultimate answer to that would be coming down to what you all actually have a budget for.
Yeah.
So in regards to that, they just did go through their whole budget process, so I am due to meet with the community development director on budgeted things. She did mention to me that she knows some budget items got cut out, but she wasn't sure if HP was one of them, so we may have to look at that again. But right now, we're just hoping that money is still there, and it wasn't, a grand amount, but it was enough to start a program. But great. Member Jones.
Last,
No, you're
but
not
not
last.
least, my interest is in plaques for residential properties that are within the district that have had work done to them and they have been preserved. And I don't know what the current use is for the Penn House since it's been renovated. Is it a commercial property?
I'm not sure. Do you know that one, Abe? Is the penthouse, that one being used as a bed and breakfast or on
I think that
Massachusetts?
originally they were planning to make that commercial, is zone commercial, and they can use commercial, but I think they're living there.
Living in it. Yeah.
Living
I
in-
hadn't heard of any commercial
But I
activity there.
think that because that's maybe a mixed use, or for other homes that are in the district, a preservation award of some type at least on these properties, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be in the designs that we have presented here. You could come up with, a different design, but something to distinguish them as having been through the process. that they have received this preservation award. They've gone through the steps and to acknowledge their efforts and their property. Those, I think the others have been addressed, but those are also my concern, because I would not like them, those properties to get lost, because I think that the more of those that we can feature, it may encourage other people that are owners of those properties to take steps to do some preservation and upgrading of their properties. And they too could get a plaque on their house.
People love them.
They love them.
I've seen property owners plan rehabs around preservation
Yes,
awards and
it's
the
just
potential of
like
getting plaques.
some people used to like baseball cards. I wasn't one of those people.
So is Patrice here? No. she's
No.
not here. Okay, because as she was talking, I was thinking about some other houses too, who had, that, I mean, like her house, for instance, the Lamb House, that's kept up very, very well, and they've done a lot of, upkeep to keep it that way. But they haven't been through our committee to go do any
No.
preservation or anything.
That would be when we
No.
get to talking about awards, talking about criteria, because I would recommend that you would open up the awards citywide, not just in the district. So they're only going to come before your board if they are in the district. Just remember that. But we do want to encourage, as a city, proper rehab. And so if somebody's doing a good rehab without even having the requirement of doing so, I think that they should be recognized for that. So when we get
Agreed.
to talking about criteria and specifics, we'll visit that a little bit longer. But Member Okendo?
I know Miss Olive could probably tell us from her historic tours how many of the houses are on the tour that people actually stop in, look into the houses. Some people stop actually at the house and look at them and get information. Maybe if they're, it's been a while since COVID, we haven't done the tour, have we?
No, this year we're going to do it. In January, we will do it again.
Yeah.
Can you send me the date of that?
The 21st,
What time?
Saturday, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 4 o'clock.
Yeah, because
And-
they started with one bus and ended up now having to make like 3 or 4 trips
Yeah.
because people actually want to see them. But it's nice that maybe some of the houses that are on there that don't have anything have something to show for that they're being used as in the tour. That's historic because they're saying why it's on their pamphlets.
Okay.
And if you want to go on one of these tours, you need reservations, because when the buses are full, they're full.
Yeah, I've had people walk back to the house because we open it for them to see inside, and they walk back to the house and ask us questions about it and everything.
Great.
So,
Well, you'll
We
see me
al-
there.
Yeah, we already have 3 reservations
Great.
already.
Mine is
That's
one of them. I go every year.
That's great. Well, I plan to do this now. I will put it on my calendar. So you like seeing them for the tourism
Yeah,
potential
for the
and
poor,
the
because if
information
we're gonna keep
potential.
on doing them, so people can actually come back and they've told a friend, oh, this house was on the tour, how can you find it? Well, they're gonna be looking for plaques around to see what was on the tour. And that way keeps on bringing more revenue for other people to keep on coming into St. Cloud. Because they actually have something to see where, if they're not from here, they're able to drive around town and see which ones they are.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Horning, one year we had a tour of the commercial properties.
Yes, we did. In 2020, we did the commercial properties. So, and everybody asked to have the house properties brought back. So this time we're doing the houses again.
People love the
So we have about
houses.
30 houses on the tour.
And are all of those, people can access the interiors on all of them?
Excuse me?
No, they
Good.
drive by them.
They're drive-bys?
Yeah,
Okay.
they're drive-by, and then we tell them at the end of the tour which houses are open.
Open.
And then they can go back on their own after the tour.
That's
and-
great.
And go through them, yeah. So
And-
we're really happy that you all let us come in your house.
And you get a booklet when you're on the tour that describes all the properties.
That's great.
that Olive works very hard on.
And it helps a lot because I think the Council of Aging is the one that puts that together, so it helps the Council of Aging also get involved in our community.
Council on Aging? Oh, that's great.
Yeah, because I think they're the ones that supply your buses, right?
No, well,
One year they
the
did.
first couple
Yeah.
of tours, yes, we used buses from the Council for Aging, but then they weren't available again. Those were only 15-passenger buses, so we had to have 2 each time. Then we still had a waiting list, so, but no, this one we're going to use a different company, and it holds 38 people, so it'll be 37 actually, because the narrator has to have a seat. Yep, so it'll be one bus.
So,
And we need to keep in mind too, that we do have tours available currently. The Historic Mural Tours has a tour and a brochure, and they all have plaques that are more like a little bit maybe like the Preservation Award one, but it has information about why that plaque is historic. So we do have those, and then the markers are on the state site, and we have a marker tour that's in that brochure as well. So there are opportunities to tour all of this stuff, and the buildings are in there. So there's a historic, which is the one that Ron McCracken does for us monthly in fall through spring, not the summer.
so the plaques that you're talking about, which is more like that Preservation Award example, do you have an inventory, a list of the addresses that those are located?
Yeah, they're all our murals, all the murals.
Oh, not just, I'm talking about the plaques.
That's
That-
on the mural. All the murals have them right
Okay.
next to them.
Okay, and it's similar to this one here?
It's, no, it's similar to this one, but it has more language on it.
Okay, okay. So if you turn to the next one, the one that says Bank of Inverness, would it be content like that, or there's some kind of verbiage?
It's smaller, it's not that big.
Okay, so
And
it's
there's
kind
no
of,
photo on it because it's right next to the mural that it's describing.
got it, okay.
But it's still an interpretive plaque.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean,
So-
you could do interpretive plaques for the kit homes. You know, if you're only talking about where you have, you have 3 now that you know for sure. I mean, that's enough that you could do the informative plaques in each of the locations.
So knowing that there's not an endless funding for this, can I get from you all just a order of priority, what you feel, if you were prioritizing, what kind of plaques would be out there? Give me your number 1, your number 2, and so on.
Well, my number 1 would be the oval, the years for the mostly residential and or commercial that just identifies it as a historic home.
And that would be,
This one,
That'd be like the state historic marker,
that one. I think your National Register, once we go through the next month or so and get the district on the National Register, that plays in.
do you have a preference for which one you like for the National Register? The first one or the second one?
Well, my personal opinion is to stay with the design that we already have instead of mixing it up. So it would be the one above it would be this one.
the one
You
on the
show
left,
me
This one.
over here,
the top left.
top left, okay.
The one on the left.
And do you want to give me what your third choice would be?
Well, I think we moved to the interpretive one, but I don't know how long down the road that's going to be before hopefully this next year we'll inventory that other district that has the kit homes in it, and then that catapults it, but that's going to be a couple of years down the road before we get to that, so.
It's also from
What's your opinion about Preservation Awards plaque?
Well, I think something completely different should be done for that.
I do too.
Okay.
From a standpoint of budgeting, though, I mean, your interpretive plaques, could be, really funding specific so that you wouldn't necessarily put them on a regular budget of funding because you're not necessarily going to have a regular element to that. So, and to be honest, I'm not sure. So once we establish a district, then what's from a national historic plaque standpoint, does that speed up the process as far as getting, recognition for historic structures within the district? Or that's still going to have to go through a long,
It's
drawn-out
faster.
process?
It's faster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say, because then otherwise, it's just like the interpretive. You're not going to be doing them as often, so it isn't really, if you will, something that we would want to try and keep an annual budget going of. Whereas if you decide from a preservation award, if you're trying to use that to entice people, then it is something that you would want to have more of because it's something you would want repetitively done. I
And
think
keep in mind, when I'm asking you to, the priority, let's not think of terms of, just this little pot of money, because I always keep in mind things that we could apply for future grant requests.
Correct.
So,
But I'm thinking of it, if we go with the state marker, set the oval one similar to what we have, if you give somebody a preservation award, we can look at, it doesn't even have to be something that's oval, we could actually come up with a shape that's complementary to actually mount either above or below the state marker, because then, it's like, it's just kind of like in a military standpoint, you're going to get your ribbon, but, you may, get,
different
your little
metals and-
pineapples or grenades, whatever you want to call them.
I was
onto
just
them
in
and that kind of thing.
Alexandria, Virginia, and it wasn't uncommon to see a historic building that had 3 different things
Markers and
mounted on
things
it,
too,
yeah.
And
Yeah,
as
they-
long as we do it so that it's complementary,
Yeah.
and doesn't look gaudy, then,
And that it fits in with the structure.
we're not worried about that.
So we can keep the discussion moving. What I'm going to ask is if you can just, next to these pictures, I'm going to collect them to you. Just put your number 1, your number 2, your number 3, et cetera, and give these to me after the meeting, okay? And that way I can see where you all are agreeing. So I do want to make sure we get to talking about the awards. So the last thing I really wanted to say in regards to the plaques is some of the considerations that we're going to have as we're really putting this together is obviously cost. That's going to be a number 1, right? But we're going to want to discuss materials, what the dimensions of these should be, where we want to see them actually physically placed on the buildings. So these are things that as we proceed with putting this together and actually having an application package and all of that, that we're going to have to flush out. So before I get too far in this, does anybody have a strong opinion about any of those things that I mentioned? So I'll go through it again. Materials, dimension, the verbiage on it, and the placement on the building. Because of course, cost, you're all going to care about cost. But any strong opinions about what type of material we want to see out there if these things are being mounted to buildings?
Well, your current materials are bronze. So, at
That's
least
what
for
I
the two,
prefer.
just for the 2.
Yeah.
Now, you could do anything, I guess, you want with the other ones, but to match those, the bronze ones would be, and it has the brown on the bronze for certain ones.
Those are the ones that are going to stand up to the elements best also,
Right.
are the bronze.
Yeah.
I believe they should always face the address of the property. So when you're driving by, it's not like on the side of the house, it's actually on where it says it's supposed to be the front of the house.
Most of your current ones, the not like the 1925 example, are currently on the right-hand side of the door. Usually just above halfway up,
Right about with the
The
doorbell,
door.
above the doorbell.
if they had a doorbell.
Above where the doorbell would be.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other opinions about that?
I don't know that a left to right is specific. I think more general eye level and, again, facing the public way
And that
is
could
probably
be-
more important.
That may be also be depending on what they have, if they have pots or plants around there where you could view it better also.
Depends on what the architecture is as well.
Yeah.
That has a big impact.
But we want to make sure that when we put this out there, we have general guidelines for the placement of them. Okay. Is there anything else you want to address in this discussion about the plaques before I move on to the awards?
Do you have a number of how many other houses may be applying for National Registry?
We'll be talking about that at 6 p.m. So when you do a district, anything that's contributing will contribute to your National Register designation. So it's technically is then considered listed on the National Register, because the National Register is a list of buildings. It's just that you have individual designations before you have a district. Once you have a district, they don't go back and do individual nominations to the district because you're already contributing. And it's, really at the core, it's just inventory. So I wish I can keep this number in my head, but I want to say that we have 208 or 209 contributing to our district. I don't know if Stephanie has that in front of for our meeting, but it's over 200.
Okay.
And we evaluated with the survey 275 properties. But I'll get to this in more detail when we are for that meeting. Okay, are we good? Can I move on to awards? Yes? Okay. So, I guess I need to speed these slides up here. So, with the awards, we can, develop an award program that I would propose that you all would actually give these awards in May, so that way you're doing it in alignment with National Preservation Month, which is the month of May. We have the City Council do a proclamation for preservation, and the idea, if we could have everything we want, would be that there would be a very nice reception outside of City Hall for award winners, where we would have a presentation and we'd make a big deal of them, basically. So I want to first talk about the types of awards that we could confer to these worthy property owners. One would be the plaque that we just discussed that could be mounted on the building that says like Preservation Award and the year, and maybe the year of the house or what have you. That's one. The other thing you all could consider, but I caution you on this because I've seen other cities do it, and over time they don't tend to wear so well, but they are relatively inexpensive, and that would be doing a Preservation Award banner. So I guess I should talk to city staff to make sure that banners could be put on residential buildings, but some cities do a banner where the banner could be hung from a porch or something like that says Preservation Awards. And then some cities, especially cities or organizations, I should say, because sometimes it's a nonprofit that does this, sometimes they'll just do an award certificate. So I'm a trustee of the Florida Trust. We've done actual wooden plaques, but for many years we did award certificates that we just put in frames and we would give it at our reception event. And those are very nice too, because people could put them on the wall in their office or in their home. So I want to get a sense from you all, out of those three, what you think we should consider for an awards program. Do we want to have an actual physical plaque that's mounted to the building? Do you want to explore doing something like banners? Or do you just want to have a certificate that you can give to them that they can hang proudly in their home? Yes, Member Jones.
I think that we need to exercise caution with regard to banners, as the sign ordinance may have some restrictions with regard to banners being flown or attached to properties. I know there is a restriction against, I don't know what they're called, but they're these things that where you stick it in the ground
Snipe signs.
and they bring
Pink
attention
flamingos.
to people.
Oh, yeah, those. Okay, I know what you're talking about.
I don't know what they're called, but I know you get in trouble if you have one stuck in the ground.
They're the banner flags are what you're talking
Yeah,
about, the
like
tall ones,
flags.
yeah.
You can only have them like for 30 days at a time.
Oh, we can-
It's
we-
not
we-
advertising, it's merely decoration.
We had them at the museum, Heritage
permit for it?
Museum, and we were cited
Did you
for
do a
them.
permit for it?
So this is your wish list. Everything
That's
that we're
wild.
discussing today has to actually be compiled into a format that makes sense and presented to city staff for their feedback. So we'll make sure that whatever we do settle upon is okay within
Is
the
legal.
ordinances. Yeah. We'll make sure you're legal, I promise.
We don't want to be on the naughty list.
No, we've already been on the.
Well, I personally prefer something that's longevity and that is identifiable for people out on the street to know that something is historic. I think it just covers all the bases. It lets the community know that there's something special about it. It gets them excited about maybe they'd want to do it to their home if appropriate. You know, and it's not like stuck in somebody's house you're never going to see. So,
Well,
Agreed.
From an award standpoint, I guess you also have to discuss, well, how many are we talking about per annum? You know, so in other words, what's the cumulative effect? Because, I mean, you can do plaques and you can banners, assuming that you can, you know, that it meets all the criteria. But the thing is how many of them are you doing? Is it a defined award in perpetuity? Is it defined, you know, what exactly are we doing? What's the goal of it? Because that's going to have a bigger impact as to how much you spend on it as well.
That's my next two items before we wrap up are awards categories and awards criteria. So we'll cover that when we discuss those. But just your initial reaction, would you prefer to see a plaque that's mounted on the building, a banner or certificate? I've heard from Member Horning and Member Stark. And Member Jones, I think, piped in over there and said on the building, right?
On the building.
Yeah, on the building.
it doesn't matter what you think.
It's not going to work for you there because you can't force me to do it. You know, again, permanent a permanent element like a plaque. Again, I have to fall back to, you know, what's the ultimate goal of this? What's the number that we're trying to do? You know, are we trying to basically make it so that every single historic building within the district has their own little award? You know, that kind of thing.
If every
So-
single building in the district was rehab
Historic building,
sensitively,
yes.
if every single historic building was rehab sensitively, do you think that would be overkill? If you had a beautiful, amazing,
I'm not saying it wouldn't necessarily be overkill. I'm just saying it has an impact on, you know, what we're budgeting and what we're doing. So, I mean, if it takes 10 years to achieve that, it's different than if, you know,
it'll take much longer.
correct. But I mean, but it depends on what the significance of the award is, what, you know. We give awards in my profession every year, you know, and there's plenty of them. People have lots of little plaques and whatnot up on their walls and on their shelves. So that's just the reason why. I mean, you get too many of them, then the question is what's the value of them?
Okay, so you like to keep it more on the end of being pretty prestigious, which is good because then when we get into awards category and awards criteria, we could talk about that because that gets into limits on number of awards you give each year.
I mean, it's one thing to recognize a building for being historic. You know, the award says something, to me, should be saying something different.
Okay?
And we have 4 minutes to talk about that.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it should be on the building,
Okay.
because if you sell the property to somebody else and they keep you, whatever you gave them, they're not gonna know where they put it or whatever, and nobody else is ever gonna know about it.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so we got into that. So awards categories, what I have outlined right now, of course, is that we want to recognize preservation, rehabilitation efforts. So some of the ways that we could do that is we could recognize organizations. So maybe nonprofit organization that's doing preservation work in your community. We can recognize an individual if you want to do an award for an individual who's made a significant impact on furthering preservation in your community. And then, of course, we would do recognition of properties. So within that, we would have residential properties, commercial properties, and then I have a category other, which is civic properties, religious properties. Those would be kind of the 3 areas under properties that you could recognize. Abe is here, and he's also been involved in awards programs in other communities, so I don't know if he wants to weigh in and give you a little guidance on that. He and I did have a discussion about it, But basically, the sum of our conversation is that in any given year, you're probably not going to have one from each category. The likelihood that you're going to have a residential, a commercial, a religious building, a civic building, all happen in one year, you would be jumping for joy if that were to happen. More likely, you may have two residential properties or one commercial property in any given year. But we should definitely define what these categories are. I would caution right now on recognition of an individual unless you feel like there are some people that out the gate you would want to recognize as individual. But that's up to you. I definitely think you should recognize organization efforts for sure, and that you should recognize properties. So I look to you all for feedback on that one. While you're thinking about that, since Member Jones reminds me of the time, I want to talk about, just keep thinking about that, awards criteria. I have some standard criteria that other communities use. One is that the property in the awards should comply with whatever historic preservation ordinance is out there. So even if they're outside the district, if they had been in the district and had gone before HPB, would this have been something that HPB would have approved? So I think you really need to look at it in the lens of your ordinance. Another thing that I think is very important is to not confer an award on a property that has code enforcement violations. So maybe they did a great rehab, but maybe they're habitual with the code enforcement violations. I don't think that sends the right message. Properties should be a minimum of 50 years of age, obviously located within the St. Cloud city limits. I just point that out because, again, I encourage that you do look at properties that are outside of your district. And I would recommend that you evaluate the entire property, not just say, as an example, if you were looking at a house, you might give a preservation award because they did a great rehab to the house, but maybe they have a garage that's also of age and it's just simply falling over. That also doesn't send the greatest message. So I think your entire property should evaluate it. And the last thing is, I think when you're considering awards applications, that the work at the time of application should be completed, because I've seen so many times where awards are, nominated and then something happens with the project and then they're given the award and then the rehab's not done and then the rehab never gets done. So I would say that you should probably think about making sure that the rehab is completed at time of application, and if they're not, then encourage them to apply next year. So I've got 2 minutes.
You did it.
I guess my only response in regards to your last criteria item, and that with your example that you made, is if somebody's doing a massive rehabilitation on a property and they take the primary building and they rehab it, but they don't have the time or money to finish up or get to, if you will, an outbuilding, I'm not sure that should be something that you would discredit them from being awarded, because you're trying to award good behavior, not an unlimited budget. So that would be something that I would, say to take into consideration in regards to that.
Yeah, what I have here on that one bullet point above that one is that the entire property should be evaluated. Not that it would be excluded, but that you at least should look at it. So that gives you an opportunity to look at if they have something that's in process and, maybe there's 2 buildings on the site, at least look at the other building in your evaluation if it's truly in process and they're going somewhere with it, or if they're not ready to do a rehab, maybe they've buttoned the building up properly. But I'm talking about, I don't think it's a good idea for you all to give an award if you have a building on the same parcel that's like falling over. So, not to say that it would prevent them from getting the award, but I think that it should be part of that evaluation process.
Yeah, that's really the only point I was trying to make.
So what do you all think about as far as awards categories go? And you can add categories here too, if that's something that you wish, but I have here recognition for a building, recognition for an organization, recognition for an individual. If it's a building, I have the categories of residential, commercial, and then the other, which would include properties like civic and religious.
Well, I think we should recognize buildings first.
Okay.
I just feel that way. I'm sure there are a lot of of individuals in St. Cloud who could be recognized for what they've done, and way back, 100 years ago for what they did. But I think to make some headway there, I think it's best to go with the buildings.
I mean, when you think about it, I mean, recognition, preservation, or rehabilitation could encompass either individuals or, if you will, organizations. So I don't know that it needs to necessarily be broken down into three separate categories. I think that the recognition of preservation or rehabilitation efforts could really encompass all of that. And I mean, it's just a matter of how you write the criteria of the award itself, more
That-
than anything.
That's what I was going to say. If you decide not to break it down into categories, it does make establishing the criteria a little bit trickier.
Yeah.
You're okay with that?
I'm okay with, I have no problem with defining what the criteria should be for an award, because otherwise, it becomes a participation award, everybody wins.
But the criteria for a building is going to be different from an organization, is going to be different than an individual.
Okay, but I mean, you're talking about preservation and rehabilitation efforts, not necessarily recognition of a commercial or residential building. I wasn't trying to lump everything into one. I was just basically the first three bullet points really the two and three actually fall under what, in my opinion, would be the first bullet point, and then you would have the next three bullet points fall under buildings, residential, commercial, civic. Because
Okay.
to me, religious is a civic organization, so I don't know that I don't know that you need to specifically say religious organizations anywhere other than when you start to expand the criteria of what that means.
So you're saying technically to have two categories with those subcategories underneath them? Is that what you're saying, Richard?
Correct.
And the two categories would be,
Would be the recognition of preservation rehabilitation efforts, or, recognition of structures, preserved structures, which be commercial, residential, or civic.
And we do have organizations that are over 100 years old here in St. Cloud. So it's not like we don't have any old organizations either.
Yeah, but what
And I
I'm
don't
saying,
think they've ever been recognized for anything.
I'm just saying that you don't need to have the subcategories broken out into a main category. I mean, it just really depends on what you want to do, but I mean, it gives a lot more flexibility in your award program to have two main categories and then have subcategory criteria, and that, also has a difference on, how many different types of certificates or plaques or whatnot, not that you actually have to have produced. If they're plaques, then you're talking about dies or, engraving. So, consistency as to how many different types you have to do can have a cost factor. Certificates which are printed, not as most difficult as what the actual bronze plaques.
but again, you don't want to print 10 certificates for one awards year.
No, you don't. I mean, again, it boils down to what it is what you're trying to do, and how many, again.
I wouldn't mind the recognition of a building, and a lot of times the person that made the building isn't there, but actually to recognize the person that had made the building for whatever reasons they're there. They did the building or whatever reason they built it.
Are you saying to recognize the person in the past?
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that the board should weigh in on, because if the preservation awards are to kind of recognize somebody for their efforts, that's more present day. So I'd like to hear from and I was thinking that too when Member Horning was just speaking. Just because an organization's been around 100 years doesn't necessarily mean that they contributed to preservation efforts. So that's why, again, criteria is important, is,
Yes.
what are we trying to recognize when we're granting these awards? Just to say, you've been an organization in St. Cloud for 100 years and not tied to preservation, I think we need to establish some firmer criteria there.
Do you need
Yes,
more?
Member Jones? It's time?
I was
It's
just going to
time.
say, we're 5 minutes past time, so I was just going to say, it depends on on our board if they want to keep talking, and it's just cutting into their break time before we start back up.
Well, I'm going to say something, and then I hope this is the last word. I have spent the last 5 years going through St. Cloud's history documents, and I can tell you, there isn't that much property out there that is probably owned by organizations now. There are organizations, but many of them are gone. They don't exist anymore. So I think if we just have some broad general categories, I trust you, Ms. Dalton, to come up with what those categories are. And then we can deal with it when you have something in writing for us to pick at the
I
next
think
meeting.
you've given me enough for what I was looking for sure.
I hope so. And now I think it's time for us to have our break, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Now that I've been given direction. We'll reconvene at the top of the hour.